Hi guys, thanks for joining us today. We'll just give it a minute or so just to let a few more attendees join. Well, it is very windy at my house today. So if my house blows away, you know what happened.
So say we can't hear through the microphone.
Well, that's good. My whole roof is rattling.
I was going to share a story about how my washing flew away this morning because it was so windy. I had to run outside of my apartment block and chase down my underwear.
Oh, geez.
That's a good story to start off with.
It is,
right.
and I forgot that it's on record.
We will start. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us today. Today's technical workshop is on our infrastructure as a service platform. This is not a sales presentation. We'll run very quickly through the product and how we differentiate, but most of it is technical demo. This session will be recorded. So if you need to drop off or you want to share it around, just check out our events page and you'll be able to access the recording from there. Likewise, if you guys have got any questions or you want to see anything specific, just ask them in the chat and we can answer them as we go. Always like to keep these as collaborative as possible. So yeah, we will get into it. So at a very high level, and the first couple of these are very quick. What is infrastructure as a service? Sort of, how we differentiate, how we manage backups, and then basically the technical demo running through the platform. And Dylan will be taking care of all those bits, and then just sort of highlighting some of the assets that are available for you when promoting your infrastructure as a service offerings. So first things first. So infrastructure as a service, what is it? Most of you are going to be familiar with, Azure or those sort of bits and pieces. Basically, it means that you're purchasing compute resources and as a service, where on premise you're responsible for everything: the networking, the storage, the compute, absolutely everything. If a disk dies, you're responsible for it. With infrastructure as a service, we take care of all of the hardware components, right? So we're talking networking, compute, storage, the availability of the platform, right? So we make sure the lights are on and that you're getting the performance that you are paying for, and then you're responsible for the OS layer, right? So anything up and above. So deploying that OS, managing those applications that are within that, and all of those sort of components. So fairly straightforward. Most people here are going to be familiar with the as a service model. So yeah, very quick. So how do we differentiate, right, versus say Azure, AWS, and whatnot, right? First of all, we bill in AUD, and our target market is managed service providers. So the entire platform, like everything else that we run, is built with an MSP in mind, right? So one of the headaches for MSPs that, if you don't already know, we started as an MSP. So a lot of these are pain points that we've experienced ourselves, but billing, right? The large cloud providers are, they're billing in an hourly basis. We bill in a fixed predictable rate, right? So that way your clients can budget. They know exactly what they're going to be up for each month. So it's a lot easier to and to sell and whatnot as well, because it's very easy to calculate exactly what you are being charged for and what you actually need. So the next piece, co-location and BYOD, right? So our solution can be tied into any number of our other solutions, right? If you've got co-location with another provider, then NextDC, Equinix, virtually any DC in Australia, we have a national network. We can do all of the plumbing for you, and there's no extra cost to sort of help engineer and design any of that, right? So we're kind of that technical extension to your team. You support your end customer. We're going to make sure that the solution, is designed properly. And it works, right? We can connect to, like I said, any DC anywhere really in Australia. We will help you with the co-selling piece of it. So if you need to bring us into the deal, we will help you with the presentations. We will help you, talk to your client as a trusted resource. either as you or as hosted network, depending on the partner. Some people prefer to white label. You are, of course, entirely welcome to just sell it and transact on your own. The next couple of pieces, delayed billing, right? That's quite unique. We understand that you've actually got to migrate or stand up a platform. So we offer delayed billing up to 30 days, right? So that you can actually get things up and running. And then, again, another unique piece, we offer free migration, right? Our engineers will work alongside your engineers to help you with the actual migration of workloads, whether that be from on-prem or from, AWS or another provider, Azure, etc. And then, like I mentioned before, tying it into our other services. So, we've got a lot of, say, 3CX providers that run their infrastructure on us, and we provide the SIP and whatnot. But we also provide the connectivity, plumb that back into the environment, so it's all on net, right? So we can tie the entire piece together very nicely, which provides a better experience for your customer, because we've got better end-to-end diagnostic capability and a more predictable approach to how your team operates as an MSP. So the next piece, just very quickly, and this is not meant to be too technical, but if you're speccing a solution with HN, it is all about the resources. We sell it to you as a pool of resourcing, right? So the pricing here is an example, but versus say Azure or AWS, which are instance-based, you buy a VM and then you buy disks and whatnot. From us, you buy what we call a virtual data center, right? Which is a pool of resources. How you divide that pool of resources up is entirely up to you. You want to shift a gig of RAM from one VM to another, go for it, right? You have that flexibility. With say Azure, if you want to go from say 64, the next jump might be 128 gig of RAM. There's nothing like that with us. If you need an extra 1 gig of RAM, purchase 1 gig of RAM. That's fine. How to spec that? Look at the resources that each VM needs and total it up, which is basically what this here is showing. So it's a quantity-based pricing model versus a instance-based pricing model. From a storage point of view, we have 3 tiers of storage. So bronze, silver, and gold, which is SATA, SAS, or SSD-based performance. That is all about to be upgraded to SSD and entirely NVMe soon as well. So the bronze and the SATA and the SAS tiers will actually disappear probably the next 3 months. But yeah, and then it's really from there is just entirely quantity based. So if you do need help with these pieces of it, you can leverage our team. We can help you do audits. We can help you spec up those resources as needed and work with you on that deal. So always feel free to leverage us. Outsource it, if you will, to our team. We do this stuff day in, day out. So we're very apt at finding where what resources you actually need. If you're running an older spec, on-prem workload, as an example, our newer kit is you're going to get efficiencies there, right? Our team will understand that, where you're going to get those efficiencies and help you, translate that to your customer. So, Dylan, the first sort of technical, do you want to just quickly run through our backups, if you choose to have our backups?
Yep. So you do have a choice of whether to bring your own backup solution to us or use our Veeam self-service portal. It's entirely up to you. You do get a little bit extra performance with our self-service portal because it's all on net, doesn't have to leave our network.
So backups and restores are going to be quicker and things.
Yeah. So we use the self-service managed backup portal, which comes with Veeam Enterprise Plus. It's actually very simple to use. You can manage all your backup jobs in there, manage when they run, set up email notifications, the typical things, as well as it gives you the flexibility with the restores to do a file level backup directly back to the VM. File level restore back to the VM, restore individual SQL or Oracle databases, explore Exchange servers and things like that. Even just restore Active Directory items back to your VM directly. And you can do that all through the same portal without having to jump around and access different portals. Like you might have to boot from an ISO to use your, say, Shadow Protect or something like that in order to restore. This will just go straight to vCloud and do it all for you.
Yeah, so it's much more point and click, right? So if it's 2 a.m. in the morning And I don't know, you got a server down, you don't have to worry about booting from an ISO and all that. It's literally right click restore, let it do its thing.
Yep. And it also has a thing called change block restore. So it'll actually go through, compare the blocks in the current disk to what's in the backup and only restore the ones that have changed. I've actually had about a 2 terabyte VM restore in about 25, 30 minutes, as opposed to a couple of hours using the change block restore.
So it's only going to restore the changes. So little things like that, we try it with like all our services. Everything's done with MSP in mind, right? So it's designed to be easy. It's designed to be simple so that you can, better support your customer. But it's optional. If you want to use StorageCraft or if you've got another agent-based backup, you can install it into your VM and away you go. We've got a good mix of partners that do a bit of A and a bit of B. And we don't point you towards any particular way. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah.
The last one there is that if you do use us, now I'm going to point it back to us a little bit, is that we do provide 24/7 support at no extra cost. So, that 2 a.m. in the morning call, if you get stuck, we're there to help. And there's been quite a few, cases where, and our team will always have to do that in the weekend. If you've got, a crypto or a migration didn't quite go to help, that's what you get with us. And we understand that, things break, we're there to help. And there's no extra cost for that either, versus like, say, Azure, where you've got to pay for premium support and all those pieces. You don't. With us, it's just included. Cool. Okay, so that's a very high level. So we're going to jump into the technical solution. So Dylan, I will stop sharing.
Before you guys do, we actually have a question in the chat, and I'm wondering if you guys are bringing this up later or it's something you can answer now. It is, what security measures are in place?
Okay, so it will depend on your setup. We are providing as an infrastructure service from a security standpoint. It's however you configure the environment, right? So if you think of the same security precautions as Azure or anything like that, everything is logically separated. So each tenant, each customer, each VM, they might run on a platform that is shared. So underlying is we run VMware, but each virtual machine is logically separated. They can't, unless you do the networking to change that, then, from a networking standpoint, there's no access there. Storage is encrypted, all those pieces as well. Everything that we run is enterprise, right? So it's been designed from the ground up with best practices in mind. From a external in, right? So we're talking firewalls, those sort of bits and pieces, again, entirely up to you. If you open a port, and you weren't meant to, then that's kind of on you. Your choice of firewall and whatnot, and how you configure that is entirely up to you. We're certainly there to help and point you in the right direction, but we are a platform provider in that sense. We're providing you a pool of resources. You can configure it any way that you would like. So it's kind of similar in the sense of if you were to buy a physical, Dell server and stick it on-prem, you configure it however you want to.
And we're just focusing on the security, the underlying hardware and things like that.
Yeah. So we take care of all those security patches, like if there's a vulnerability, an example of in the Intel CPUs a few years back, we take care of all those patching, and we will do that, maintenance, and it's all because we run a HA environment. We will move workloads around so there's no impact to you, and basically make sure everything's patched from an underlying hypervisor layer, and the storage stack, the networking stack, all of those pieces we take care of, right, from a security standpoint. Whereas from an access standpoint, so in networking, those pieces, you are responsible for that.
And you mentioned HA. So for those who might be new to infrastructure as a service and that terminology, what does HA mean?
High availability, and it is important to know that it is a bit of a buzzword that gets thrown around like cloud, right? HA in our case means that if an underlying host was to die, fail for whatever reason, those workloads will automatically reboot elsewhere in our environment. Now that does mean there is an interruption to the VM, but you don't have to do anything to get that VM online. right? Now, and that's the exact same with Azure, AWS, all of those sort of guys. So where some of the confusion happens with HA is that it is not fault tolerant, right? So fault tolerant means that everything will continue to operate regardless, and that is typically done at the application layer, right? So if you think of Active Directory, or you think of Exchange, if anyone's still running Exchange clusters, or file servers, it's going to be done at like DFS or DAG or Active Directory replication, those sort of, and that's at the application layer to make that particular service fault tolerant. Cool. All right, Dylan, I will stop sharing now and hand over to you.
Cool. So I'll just share my window.
So if anyone wants us to, we'll go through our standard sort of approach of explaining each bit, but if anyone would like us to go into any more detail about how to do something, because I do see a number of our partners on this call, new engineers, things like that, by all means ask and we'll go through it.
Yep. So with our vCloud platform, all of our partners will get their own individual unique login. So again, all logically separated. One partner can't access the environment of another. Just quickly.
So you get a login for your MSP.
Yeah. And this login allows you to access all the VDCs underneath your account, which is a virtual data center. So you think of these as individual organizations for each customer. So if you onboard a new customer, you would order another virtual data center for us with all your resources under there.
And you can control the users, right? So you can give access to an end customer to one virtual data center, but not another. Even to your staff, you might restrict access to certain things, and you can even certain functions. So they can, they can't reboot a VM, they can't create a VM, but they can access the console, as an example.
Yeah. So a good example, I actually had to do this for a partner a few weeks ago. They weren't the direct IT support for the end customer. They're pretty much their internal IT team was just outsourcing the resources to them and getting the vCloud access through them. So they had to give the end users, or IT support, access to this portal, but not access to change any of the configuration, just for power management and console access. So you can set that up in here, set it up so they only have access to specific VMs and VApps, like Ben said.
Yeah, if you're doing co-managed IT, where the client's got an internal help desk, this works really, really well because you can kind of restrict their access and whatnot. We've just got a question here, Dylan. Can we shift resources between customers? Yes, you can. It's not quite as straightforward as sort of, take this 1 gig over here. We do an add, or what we call a modify order. So from our portal, you just remove the resources so long as they're not allocated. So you can see on the screen there. So you can see there that 5 gigahertz out of 16 has been allocated. So you could take that other 11 gigahertz and unallocate it and then just reallocate it somewhere else if that's what you chose. From a billing perspective, we bill you at the virtual data center layer. All right. So if you're not contracted, right? So we have month to month and then contract options. Contracts have a baseline, so you can go down to that baseline, but you can't go below it. All right, and then you can go up. So assuming it's month to month, then you would just decrease and then add, and you'll automatically get credited back for any decreases that you make in that period. Right. So you'll get that pro rata back to you automatically on your next bill.
Yep. So then you can't move resources in this portal, like between two VDCs. It has to go through our partner portal. Yep. Just wanted to clarify that one. So jumping into the VDC, the first thing you're going to see is essentially every single VM you have in here, it'll show up under here regardless of the VApp they're under. You can think of VApps as individual folders or containers for VMs that you can do private networking through and everything. And through this VMware, sorry, not VMware, virtual machine view, you can go into actions and actually control this power state. So you can do a reset or a power off, which is essentially just the same as pulling the plug out of the server and then putting it back in.
If you're familiar with VMware, the terminology is very consistent. ESX on-prem, some of it's slightly different, but most of it's the same.
Yeah, a lot of the features are very, very similar. You can do snapshots through here as well, but the thing you keep in mind is you need to have enough storage in your storage policy to be able to take that snapshot. because both the RAM and Snapshots consume storage out of that. So for instance, if you were to assign 16 gig of RAM to your server, you also need 16 gig of storage free for that to work. Otherwise the VM won't power on.
The reason for that is for the swap file.
Yeah.
So
a lot of the time, the swap file for other platforms may not be included because they've changed the way it works, but the way vCloud and VMware works is it needs that swap file.
So again, each because it's a pool of resources, anything that you consume, it goes into your pool.
Yeah. So, and the console, you can open either the web console. So that's not going to show because I've shared the window. Let me adjust that. Sorry. Should have just shared the window from the get-go. There we go. Can you see that again?
Yep, you can't see the console.
Oh, I've got to reopen that now. So I go open the web console. Of course, it's open on my other screen. Okay. And so you've got the web console essentially opens it up in another window, and you've got the remote console, which is another application from VMware. So this allows you to just have it open in a different application because, as you know, browsers time out.
And think of that as more of a traditional, if you're used to the old ESX, vSphere client, it's a bit like that.
Yeah. So, and through here, you can do the same things. You can manage the VM, you can control the power state and things like that, as well as just access it the way you normally would. Jumping back out of there, as well as if we go into details, you can actually come in here, control the removable media, so you can add and remove ISOs, because the platform does let you upload your own ISOs, even if it's just an Office installation, things like that, as well as control the hard disk size. The thing about hard disks, and I get asked this a lot as well, you can increase, but decreasing is not easy. It's a very, very complicated process. So if you do increase it by too much, we generally recommend just adding a second disk of the right size you want, clone it across, delete the old disk.
And the complications aren't so much from our side, they're within Windows. So if anyone's ever tried to shrink a virtual disk before, it's just limitations within Windows because the blocks on the disk have already been allocated. So hence the complexities. So there, Dylan, I can see that's on gold storage. You can have multiple tiers of disks, right?
Yep. So if I wanted to add another disk to this, I can actually go through and add a silver disk. Now, it's probably not going to let me while it's powered on, unless I've enabled it on this VM. But in some cases, some functions won't let you do it while it's powered on, purely because it doesn't have hot add enabled. Like modifying CPU and RAM by default, you can't do while the VM is on. But if you've got
you can enable it.
Yeah, you can enable hot add. Doing so, you do lose a little bit of performance, but it generally depends on whether or not you've got a workload that needs to have resources change a lot.
Yeah, we typically don't recommend it because you get the best grunt for not having it turned on. But the other one we talked about migrating resources around before. So if you've got a disk that's on silver and you wanted to migrate that to gold, that you can actually. You didn't actually. You just did.
I realized.
Yeah. So Dylan just migrated that from gold to silver. So that time that disk was actually migrating. It wasn't actually creating a new disk, right? So you can actually migrate them between storage tiers just like that. So that was a 50 gig disk that was migrated to silver in 30 odd seconds. So that way you can pay for the performance that you need. Why put logs on on SSD storage when you can put maybe the OS and the applications on the SSD storage, but logs and those sort of things can go on lower tier bronze storage. All right, so you can get better bang for buck that way. You also don't have any RAID overheads. We take care of all of that. Right, so you get 100 gig, we allocate 100 gig to you, and away you go.
Yep. So you get to use 100% of your storage.
Yep.
As you can see, I've just added another disk on gold storage, and all you would need to do now, log into Windows. So if I launch a remote console, and I'll just quickly show you. Of course, it opens on the other screen. Just make that a little bigger. Background's wigging out for some reason, but if I go to computer management, and disk,
Oh, you're one of those guys, Dylan. You know, you can just go right click on the menu and go. It's not funny
it's
how
force of habit.
You see different people do something and you're like, and you become a habit. It's always fascinating watching someone else do it.
But yeah, we've got that offline disk now. So you would just, the same as if you just plugged a new hard drive into Windows, into a standard Windows computer, just go through, format it, same process.
And you can see there that disk, so the 50 gig disk has actually, it probably started off in this case as a 30 gig disk, and someone has extended that. So you can extend the disks live, but within Windows, you'll have to just go and allocate that storage. Windows won't consume that storage by default, because you might want to position that as another partition, as an example.
Yeah, so that way you can, as Ben said, other partition. Linux would be the same, that you would have to go in there and extend the LVM if you have that set up. But it's as simple as just adding the disk, and it's instant change. Going on to the compute. So as I mentioned, if you have CPU and memory hot add enabled, you can modify these on the fly. If you don't have it enabled, and I say I try to add more resources, it's likely going to give me an error.
Basically, you just have to turn the VM off, power it off, make the changes, and then power it back on.
So not only that, I tried to use an invalid CPU configuration. So because it's said that there's 2 cores per socket, but I tried to set it to 3. So having it set to 2 cores per socket needs to be multiples of 2. So that's one thing. So the system does have some smarts in there. Make sure you don't set up something invalid that might cause a performance hit.
It's always good to consider how many sockets versus cores you've got as well. You know, having 10 different sockets and 1 core. Think of it like a physical box, right? Allocate it like you would if you were to spec up a physical box. Treat it the same way. That's the easiest way to think about it.
Some workloads do not like having multiple sockets. Some platforms like Linux doesn't care, so it'll just use all the cores as if they were individual cores. But Windows tends to have a bit of a performance hit if you configure that incorrectly, as well as the networks. So with Windows, you can add networks on the fly. If at any point, if it's going to try and do something that it doesn't support while it's turned on, it'll just throw a warning at the top, like you saw before. But you can change networks on the fly. So it's just going to think about it for a second.
So you can change networks, but you can also add network adapters, right?
So
and because it's got VMware tools installed in the OS, right, in the Windows piece of it, it will allow you to provision, I think it's up to 10 different NICs. Now all of our VMs, if you use the VMXNet 3 adapter there, you'll get 10 gig connectivity between all of your VMs. If you use the E1000, you're only going to get 1 gig, right? So VMXNet 3, the drivers will support 10 gig and you'll get, full performance that way.
Yeah, and I see a lot of our partners that they'll set it to E1000 and then they might see a bit of a performance hit because it's having to scale down.
Yeah, I see it when we do a lot of migrations, like if you do like a backup restore, it's come from on-prem. That was the old driver that they were using, and they're going to get less performance. So it's always good to check that when you're migrating a VM in to make a VMXNet 3. You're going to get the best bang for buck.
Yeah, and VMware themselves recommend not using anything else except VMXNet 3 as well. As well as the IP mode. Ben mentioned earlier that vCloud can do a lot of things. It can also automatically configure the IP addressing inside of Windows if VMware Tools is installed. So sending it to the static IP pool, I'll touch on the networking IP pools in a second, but it will grab an IP out of a predefined pool, allocate it to this VM, and configure it inside of Windows.
If you're like me, that you're really old school, you can still do it manually, of course. But if it, our whole platform has a full API so that you can spin up servers on the fly. And this is, why you have these pools, because if you're creating a VM on the fly, it's one less thing you have to script, right? So you can do some creative things like that.
Yeah, as well as you can add a VApp network, so an isolated network within that folder, straight through here as well. So you don't have to jump around and go to a different screen to add this.
And for those of you that are a bit more technical, we leverage VXLAN for what we call what VMware calls a virtual wire, right? So that's creating a VXLAN across in between those VMs, right? So not a standard VLAN, a VXLAN. So routed layer. Routed layer, effectively layer 2 over a layer 3 path. So it's an overlay technology.
Yep, and you can do as many of those as you want, pretty much. We're not limiting you on the amount of networks you can add. But I'm going to assume Windows isn't going to let me do this. So as well as, just while we're waiting for that, anything you do inside of vCloud, it has a full audit trail. So you can see down the bottom here, everything I've done has been adding tasks down the bottom here. So if all of a sudden, say the customer's server goes offline and you want to check, okay, was it powered off by someone inside of vCloud? You can go to the VM and look at the tasks and it gives you a full breakdown. So you can see I allocated screen ticket. So I opened the console and maybe the server went off at 125.
It's surprising how often that, like a partner might log a ticket and it's, hey, something went wrong or whatever, the server we turned off, and you go in and you're like, yeah, sorry, one of your staff members actually turned it off because they hit the wrong button. And that's where permissions and things like that come in, that they are important. So yeah.
So and you can click in and you can get some details on what the error was. So this is something that frequently when partners log tickets, if you give us this, we'll immediately know what the issue is and where to start looking. Otherwise, it can delay things a little bit if we have to go and dig for the information. As well as the other thing that's really handy is the monitoring chart. So these graphs are the exact same as if we were accessing them from the back end. So you can see the disk usage, the CPU usage, and things like that, as well from a half hour all the way up to a week point of view. This VM hasn't existed for a week, but you can see, like say the customer complained that at 11:43, the server started performing really poorly. You can see, okay, that was a CPU spike. So you can see things like that, or you can see the disk usage. So it allows you to get a little bit more of insight into what's exactly happening. And this is the exact same logs we would see from the back end. So that way you can see what we can see. Moving to the VApps quickly. So I touched on these a little bit. These are essentially containers that you can bundle VMs into. You can either create a VApp per VM if you want to, or what we've seen other partners do is they'll have, say, a management VApp where they'll have all their routers, management VMs, and then have a terminal servers VApp where all their customer workloads are. So it just depends how you want to package that up. There's no downsides to creating multiple VApps or just having one. It's just purely from a management point of view. So if you go into the VApp, you can do things like see all of your virtual machines and actually control the start and stop order, which is particularly good if you've, say, got a web server, a couple databases, and a router.
Or even Active Directory, right? You want Active Directory to start before, I don't know, or your database server to start before your app server, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so if you want to just reboot the whole environment, you can actually set up the start-stop order to make sure it boots up in the right order and control the delay from once things are started up and things like that. As well as it gives you a little network diagram to show you what networks are connected where. This isn't a good example because there's only one VM in there, but we've got customers that have easily 60, 70 VMs in a VApp. And this definitely comes in handy because they can see all the customer VLANs. So, as well as you can do, as I mentioned, your isolated networks. So this one is isolated. It's not connected to a router or anything, but it is also shared between two VApps. So that way you can create a private link between two VApps that has no internet access. It just allows
no route. It's not a routed interface, effectively.
Yeah. So you can drop a router into there if you want to. So you can spin up a FortiGate firewall. You can attach that to an edge gateway. It's up to you.
And that could be an example of the types of networks that, if you were to co-locate use a FortiGate firewall, you might spin one up as a VM, but we can co-locate those as well. If you've got existing, some of our partners have existing colo. right? And so, they've already got firewalls, but they don't want to purchase more, compute, or they want to, gradually phase that out. So they'll start, using us for that, and we can connect the networking back to their firewalls and things like that, whether it be co-located, whether it be hosted. So we can get creative with those sort of things.
We've even got partners where they don't have a router with us at all. They've just got a cross connect and we're routing everything over that.
Yeah, so pure layer 2, right? So we're not hosting any routing or anything like that. We're just doing the compute and shipping it down that layer 2 link.
Yeah, and it works really well. So vCloud is very flexible in that sense. Now, moving on to the networks a little bit. So I mentioned before you can do IP pools. So the static IP pools, you specify a range of IPs. So from start to finish, and it will just start divvying up the IPs
it's like
automatically.
DHCP, but for a static IP.
Yeah, so you can see here, it's allocated this one to my edge gateway and the other two to my 2 VMs. So that way, as Ben said, it's like DHCP, but without DHCP, there's no protocol to fail.
So what's going to happen there is that, when the VM is created, VMware tools will manually configure that IP address in the operating system for you.
So essentially,
Background.
Yeah, sorry. The console timed out, but that's all right. Essentially, it goes into Windows like if you were to manually configure the IP addressing. And that way, there's no protocol to fail. So you can't, so all of a sudden, DHCP service stops working. All of a sudden, all your VMs now have no internet. You don't have that happen. But this way,
well, I guess the next piece, if you want to run a DHCP server within the environment, you can do that from as well, but that could also be running from your own firewall. Like some partners spin up, we've got heaps of Sophos, heaps of Vios, even things like MikroTik. Is it MikroTik?
Yeah, MikroTik. There's a bunch of different ones.
Yeah, it's lots, and you can just spin them up from an ISO. So whatever, if you're comfortable with a particular vendor from a firewall or a routing perspective, we can accommodate that in there. So that way you don't need to, and you can BYO that, you're responsible for the licensing, but you just load the ISO up and away you go.
Yeah, you just need compute, storage, and you do what you want from there.
Yep.
We've touched a little bit on the edge gateways as well. So as I mentioned, this is VMware's cloud router solution. It provides all the things you would expect to have. So DHCP, your firewall, your NAT, things like that. It does
It's not a UTM. I should say that though. Yep. It's not a UTM. So if you're looking at comparing it to say a FortiGate firewall, which has got UTM functionality, it is not going to meet that. Whereas if you say a Vios router, which is just doing the features that you can see at the top there, and Dylan's going to run through, perfect replacement for that.
Yep. So this is essentially anything like a standard pfSense or Vios router might do. This can essentially do the same. So it can do some advanced routing like your BGP and OSPF and everything. Typically, we don't see too many people setting that up, but the option is there and is completely managed through here. As well as
an example of that is if you were to have an express route, you might be doing the BGP configuration between this and the BGP session. Well, the session would be established to this edge router and say the Azure instance as an example.
As well as one thing I see a lot of people are happy to see is it actually has a really robust load balancer built in. So there's a lot of legacy applications out there that don't support HA or they don't support failover. You can actually use this to do that instead. So that way you can have the virtual IP just sit on the edge gateway and it manages the load balancing, and it's all easily viewable from inside the interface here. It does require a little bit of tinkering because no two applications obviously load balance the same, but it is pretty versatile in the way you can do that.
We've very well documented, lots of videos on how to do it and that sort of stuff as well.
Like a good example is one of the old school Lotus Notes or Domino servers. So we've still got a few customers using those, but they support replication, but no failover. And you can set up the load balancer to do that failover for you. And we've just got a question here. So edge gateways aren't included by default. They are an extra cost, just because there is a bit of licensing in the back end involved in that. It's really easy to spin up though. It takes the team no time at all to spin one of those up and give you an IP address and things like that. or we can just give you a WAN IP and a network for you to spin up your own router. So,
So
if
you wanted to have VIOS as an example and stick a public IP address on that, you could do that. If you want to use the edge router, there is a small charge, but it's integrated directly into the interface, and yeah, away you go. So it's it's native as well to it connects into all the underlying VMware networking stack, or NSX for those of you that are familiar, and it's very nicely integrated in that regard.
Yep, and one of my favorite things about it is there's a common issue I see with some partners with their, like say, Surface routers and things like that. They might change a bunch of firewall rules and all of a sudden lose access to it. It happens more often than people think. It's not impossible for that to happen with the edge gateways because it doesn't push updates to the router through any network connection or anything like that. It pushes it directly to the virtual router VM through a special protocol. And that way, if I was to come into the firewall, block inbound and outbound completely, I can still come back in here and undo that.
So the management of it is isolated to the interface, so you don't lose access. So if you do something accidental, it's not too bad.
Yeah, so if all of a sudden you change a firewall rule, all your VMs no longer have internet access, you can still jump back in here and undo that. As well as you can set up the syslog server, so you can pipe the logs from this guy to your internal syslog server if you want to.
And these can be configured in HA as well. You do, much like the FortiGate pricing, if you're familiar with that, or Sophos, you're effectively multiplying. So you have two, and you've got HA. So one can be rebooted or whatever the case, or go from there.
Yeah. So, but again, with the HA, it's not going to prevent 100% of downtime. It'll just decrease the amount of downtime.
Correct.
So there will still
risk
be
mitigation.
Yeah, there still will be a few seconds of downtime while it fails over to its pair. But as opposed to not having one at all, as Ben said, if if the underlying hardware goes offline and you don't have HA set up, it will reboot automatically on another host, but you might have an extended period of downtime. That
being said, they are very, very rock solid. They are, because they're not quite a VM, and they're tightly integrated into the NSX networking stack itself. So the whole, and NSX, for those of you that know it, don't know, it's a distributed platform across the VMware at the hypervisor layer itself. So it's very robust. So even from a HA, it's certainly an option there, and sometimes it's a tick box, like in terms of from a client perspective, from a risk mitigation. But yeah, it's even redeploying it. Like if something was to go wrong, you can redeploy it in seconds.
Which I could actually show you. You can quite literally go in here and go redeploy. So, and that will physically delete the VM, redeploy it with the same configuration. So if you are seeing something weird and you just say, oh, maybe just rebuild the VM quickly, you can do that without having to chat to us. I believe that only takes 2 or 3 minutes to complete. So moving on a little bit, I mentioned that you can upload your own media and templates. So we've got a bunch of templates that are built in that we're going through and updating all the time. These ones are also can be shared. So you can publish your own templates to our public catalog and share that with the rest of the community if you'd like. Typically, we don't see too many people doing that, but the option is there.
You can also make them private as well. So if you've got your own ISOs and things like that.
So you can set up your own catalog. So you can see we've got a few test catalogs in here. You can go there and publish it. So you can make it publishable so you can access it externally. You can also, if you've already got your own catalog on site, you can subscribe to your own catalog.
Yeah, so those of you that know VMware sort of on-prem and things like that, this is it uses the same subscription process. So it's more of a newer feature, I think, as of vCenter 6 or 5 maybe. So if you're familiar with that, it's quite handy actually.
Yep, as well as you can come in here and you can upload your own ISOs and OVAs. So you can see that we've even got ones for 3CX in here to install that, as well as the Veeam availability suite. So you can just mount that ISO to a VM and like the same way you would say download an ISO and just open it inside Windows. So that way you can install things faster. Like Office typically goes a lot faster from a disk than it would be for downloading.
Yep.
And the last little tab is your administration. So this is actually where you can go in and control your users and groups and roles. So like Ben mentioned, you can completely control what someone has access to through the roles. So if I go into this cloned one, it's full granular control over what they do and don't have access to. So if you want them to be able to view a VM but not modify it, you can do that. So you can do that under the VApps. So you can give them access to, say, control the power state, can access the console, things like that. And you can share this across the entire, all of your VDCs can share this role.
Other examples are like the networking. Maybe, you want your level 1 guys to be able to manage the basic bits and pieces of the VM, but you've got other guys in your team that are better at networking. So you can isolate those permissions. Yeah,
and the platform does come with a few of them, like the console access only, so they can only access the console. If there is one, say, like with the VApp author that has almost the right permissions, but you want to, say, maybe take 1 or 2 things away, you can essentially just clone it. So you can clone it to another one and then modify it from there. As well as you can set up SAML-based authentication, which you can connect through to things like the Duo security platform. You can connect it to Azure. Anything that supports that is a SAML identity provider, you can set up in here. We do have a guide for setting up the Azure SAML authentication as well.
So that's actually for your parent organization, right? Not for the individual VDCs, correct?
No, so it's for everything.
Okay.
So setting up the SAML authentication essentially pushes all the authentication away from vCloud managing it to, say, Azure managing it.
Right. So
that way you can even have even more control because you can set up your Azure policies to say, no, you can't connect from here. Yes, you can. So someone asked if it supports Azure AD. So the SAML authentication does. The Windows, inside of Windows, it's entirely up to how you configure it. So we're not going to restrict you on what you can and can't do inside of the OS. We, in fact, don't have much visibility at all. So unless we specifically ask you to unlock the console so we can help you with an issue, we're not going to be able to access them. So as well as there's a few other things down here, like you can see the guest personalization. So the domain join I mentioned earlier, as well as some other general settings. But you don't have to use SAML authentication. You can just use all the local logins, but it's entirely up to you how you want to do that.
And something that I've just realized we haven't touched on either. So you can see data centers there. So there's virtual data centers and they can be provisioned in either Sydney or Melbourne, right? So that we have 2 availability zones in that. And you can do things like you can replicate between the 2 of them. You can have workloads running out of one and not the other, and you can tie the networking between them and stuff like that. So you can get really creative. And that's like when it comes to those circumstances that if you do need those, that's a really good use case for where you can leverage our team. Do we have any VDC plans for Perth? I've just got a question there. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Our POP in Perth is growing. It is in terms of time frame, I don't have one off the top of my head, but Perth is a big growth market for us at the moment. So if you do have use cases there, by all means reach out and we might be able to work something out.
But that's essentially the high level overview of the platform.
Cool. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, this is meant to, very high level run through, but if you'd like us to, demonstrate any particular thing, if, like I said earlier, I can see a few partners on the call. So if there's anyone that, wants us to demo something, just let us know. Do you have a sizing guide? We do have a basic one. To be honest, that our sizing guide is probably a little bit out of date because it was predominantly around RDS and things like that. So if you're spinning up RDS servers and whatnot, it's focused on that. The best case in terms of sizing environments, I'd suggest leveraging our team. Our team are very apt at sizing environments, and we can, like I said earlier, we can translate it between, say, the old on-prem and ensure that your, resource allocations and things like that are getting, you're getting the best bang for buck. So we do a lot of that. So I'd say, by all means, feel free to reach out to our, it might actually be in our knowledge base article. If you go to kb.hostednetwork.com.au, you'll see it might be in there.
So just this website.
Yep. So you'll see infrastructure as a service there on the left. It might be in there.
So that's
general.
the SAML-based authentication guide I mentioned as well.
No, it's not there. It may have been archived as legacy.
Yeah.
I'd suggest in terms of sizing, by all means, if you need help, reach out to our team. We often treat it as like a knowledge transfer exercise as well, so that the idea is that you can be, you can do it on your own in future as well. But we're there to help. We also have partners that'll just sort of forward it through and go, hey guys, can you size this up?
Yeah, at the moment, what we have is we've called it a pricing guide, but really it's a pricing calculator. As Ben mentioned, if you're a host network partner, reach out to your account manager and they'll help you with the scoping and the sizing. If not, they'll tie in a solution architect into the conversation. Yeah.
Dylan, I can see that you've got the self-service tab there. So if anyone's got any questions, feel free to post it. But we might just quickly go through the Veeam or the backup environment.
Yep. So the Veeam environment uses the same credentials to log in as it does in vCloud Director. So if you have SAML authentication set up, it'll follow the same thing. The platform is very straightforward. You've got your jobs tab where you can set up multiple jobs with different requirements. So you might have one that has, just say, keeps 1 restore point, another one that keeps 14.
Could you click the create one there for me?
Yeah.
Just because here, if we'll just quickly go through this, just because I can see a few people on here.
Yeah. So
partners. So first of all, retention policy, right? So by default, it will do it a daily backup. And so that's effectively going to do 7 increments or 7 days, yep. Right? So you've got a bit of control over that. We can go down to 15 minutes. You just have to submit a custom request for that because it does put extra load on the system. 15-minute increments of backups aren't necessarily recommended because depending on the change rate of data, it may not complete, the job may not be able to complete. So you may get failures and you generate a lot of noise. I typically recommend about an hour, but different clients that are going to have different RTOs and RPOs, then you can modify that. But it was the virtual machines piece of it that I wanted you to have a go to, Dylan.
I just want to quickly touch on this one. So you can keep full backups for a longer period of time as well. So that way you can keep, say, a weekly full for X amount of time. I would just say be very careful with this because you can blow out your storage quota quite quickly. So there are calculators online to figure out, just like specifically for Veeam, to figure out how much storage you need. And they take all these factors into account.
Yeah.
So I'll leave that off for now. I'll go next.
So when you go add, so this is the piece I just wanted to sort of cover off. So what you can do is you can actually back up everything in your organization, right? So, which is everything, right? So any VDC that you've got will be backed up, right? Regardless of what gets created. So that way you can just have that as a safeguard. There is a cost per VM to do that, but you can also go and back up uniquely into each virtual data center, right? So you can see that where Dylan's got the demo selected at the top there, that's the organization layer. The next one down is the virtual data center. And then you go into the VApp, like Dylan touched on before, and then the VM. So you can be very granular. I typically, recommend that you select the VDC or the org, but because if your team are creating VMs regularly, that can incur additional costs and whatnot. So you have that option.
Yeah, because if you select the VDC level, it will detect that you've added a new VM, automatically add it into the backup for you.
Yeah, automatically, right? And then if you've got your email notifications going to your ticketing system or your backup monitoring software, it'll basically fire those through to you, and so you can monitor them all yourselves.
Yep.
I do see. I should point this out because we do have a few partners on here. I do see far too often that email notifications aren't set up. That people create jobs and don't do this. Maybe they come back to it later, but it is important that you do this. We will flag internally, so we do monitor these to a degree, right? But we're only going to flag them with you if we see them fail for a couple of days, right? So if it becomes a red flag, then, for us, we're going to go, hey, just give you guys a nudge to say, hey, you might want to check this. And that might be anything from backup quota. It might be maybe the guest processing, the credentials that you entered have expired or something like that. But you can have those notifications sent to you. You are responsible for checking them, but we do provide a layer of, in our own checks each day as well.
So yeah, we'll keep an eye on it, because if it does pop up that it's failing and it's a problem that's outside of your control, we'll take over and we'll deal with it for you.
Correct. Yes.
So
and like I said before, with all the anything to do with vCloud, but especially backups, we provide 24/7 support, right? So if you get stuck with it provide, to back you up.
Yep, and so you can also, as I mentioned before, you can do restores directly out of here. So you can restore the VM directly back to vCloud, whether you decide to keep or overwrite. If you go keep, again, you need to make sure you've got enough storage, because it won't let you restore back to there if it's going to exceed the storage quota.
Yeah, so if you've got a VM that's 100 gig and you've only got 100 gig storage policy, and you want to keep that VM, well, you need to double that storage to 200 gig to restore that.
Yeah. So if you do decide to keep and you've got enough storage, you don't need to necessarily have the same, like double your CPU and RAM, because the CPU and RAM is only consumed as long as the VM is turned on. So
I've got another question here. Do the backups reside in the same DC? No, they do not. We back up to a secondary data center in the same state, included in the cost, right? So if it's in Sydney, it's going to go into one of our secondary data centers in Sydney. If it's in Melbourne, it's going to go into one of our secondary data centers in Melbourne. If you want it to replicate interstate, then we can also configure those sort of bits and pieces for you. So we just need to have that conversation about what your requirements are. Often it'll be, as an example, we can keep one copy in the state, and we can have another copy backup copy in another state, or we can replicate those VMs from one vCloud to another, so you can live boot them and do failover plans and DR and all of those pieces.
Yep. There's also worth noting as well, you can restore individual disks. So you can go in here and restore like a specific disk inside a VM. I'll just quickly run through this because we're running out of time. You can do the files. So you can go pick your VM, pick a date. I've only got one backup, and then mount. And that'll open the restore point and allow you to just browse through the files and try and restore directly from there. If it fails to restore directly to the VM, you also have the option of just downloading the file directly from here, and then you can manually copy it across. As well as you've got your items. So you can restore directly back to SQL servers, the database or the Oracle database. So the other thing as well is, if you are in a situation where it's not letting you restore from here, or you want to try and speed it up, we can access these backups from our side of things as well. And we do have access to some more advanced things that we might be able to do to get around it.
Yeah, as an example, for those of you that know Veeam, we can do things like instant restore of the VMs. You can't do that from the portal here because it is going into vCloud. So we can do some creative things like that. That's on request. And if you've ever done an instant restore, the performance and whatnot isn't there. But if to get you out of trouble, if it's an AD server or something like that, sometimes that can be a good option. But again, that's why we provide that that 24/7 support.
Yeah, and the other thing that we didn't touch on is moving from Hyper-V to vCloud. So you can do what's called a V to V conversion. So convert using Veeam from Hyper-V to vCloud. And we've done that for a fair few partners. It is a bit of a lengthy process just because it does have to convert, obviously, from a Hyper-V platform to vCloud, but it is possible.
We'll assist with all of that as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. And we've actually heard a lot of people moving from an on-prem Hyper-V to vCloud that they've matched the resources across the board for that, so CPU and RAM wise, and then ended up having to halve it because they had too much. There's just the performance was that much of an improvement. So, and that's the Veeam platform.
Cool. All right. Well, look, that wraps up our technical demo. We don't have any more questions of things to run through. As most of you have probably seen, it is very straightforward. Again, it's designed to remove a lot of the complexities all of our products are. So that you can get on with supporting your customer, rather than worrying about all the technical bits and pieces behind the scenes. But Dylan, can I get you to go to the next slide for me, just very quickly, just to, yeah, we've already covered that. So yeah, we do free migrations, just this one. So if you are a hosted network partner, in our content hub, in our partner portal, we have a number of different resources that you can use, from sales plays to marketing kits. And these can be, a few of these can be white labeled as well. So if you're a hosted network partner, we will white label them for you at no extra charge. Right. So if you want us to rebrand it with your logos and things like that to help you with your own marketing assets, reach out to our team. Your account manager or Meryl, who is our partner success manager, can facilitate that for you. So well worth checking that out. But
just before we move on from that, in terms of what's available to you as well, we do have a 14-day trial for our infrastructure as a service. So it is a shared demo environment, but if you wanted to have a bit of a play and get in there yourself, then you can actually register that interest via our website.
Good point. And we also provide a free proof of concepts. So if you're working on a solution and you want to see if something's going to run, or if you want to prove to a customer that, I don't know, migrating to the cloud is actually, it's going to work for them, we can work with you, understand the requirements, and stand up a proof of concept at no charge. And that's just part of the value add of being a hosted network partner. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. The next technical workshop is on our SD-WAN offering. So Dylan and our partners at Fusion Broadband will be co-hosting that. That is on the 19th of August. And then we're going to get into the week following that, we'll get into our backup as a service and DR as a service with products, which are again powered by Veeam. And that will be with Luke Bragg, our ops manager, on the 25th. And yeah, check out our events page at the bottom on our website. The link's at the bottom there. We keep that up to date. And we've also got a bunch of other non-technical things coming up as well. So if you're interested in those, be sure to register. Wonderful. All right, guys, we'll stay on for a minute or so more, just if you've got any other questions, whether it's related to IaaS or anything else, feel free. Otherwise, thank you for joining. Hopefully you guys found it valuable.
Thanks, guys, for joining.
If there is anything you'd like to see in future, or if you would like to, even do a bit more of a technical deep dive, you can book one-on-one sessions with us, so we can do, targeted training with you or your team. Check out our email signatures or for a link to book that, or just reach out to your AM.
Yeah, so I'll be sending out an email with all of the assets that are available to you, and including the one-to-one training sessions as well.
Beautiful. Cool. All right, well, looks like we've got no more questions. So enjoy the rest of your day, guys, and thanks again.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.